You are really lucky people. And there are sad people. And I guess when you look at them, you can just see why the magnetic pull that...
Right.
What a world to go. We'll get to that, of what it's like to go through the world with such a magnet.
I have a Trump-like draw, you know.
Yes, why, that was in my notes. I was going to... You're taking all my material here, Tim. That's really... actually, that was not in my notes.
Right.
So, I think we're fine. Not... Can you hear me if I'm back from the mic a little bit? Okay, good. Lean in. Cheryl, what's her name? Huh? That's lean in. How come he doesn't have to lean in, but I have to lean in?
I'll lean in.
Okay.
You know what? We'll just take our mics and hold them. Yeah.
Alrighty. So, you have programs. They have the bio of our guest tonight. The occasion is the awarding of the Stegner Award, which we have now done for decades. The originator of the Stegner Award, Charles Wilkinson, is the one who corresponded with Wallace Stegner to get this set up. And actually, I would stop there. Now that you have clapped once, I'm going to ask you to clap again, because Charles Wilkinson is the co-founder of the Center of the American West, and on a cold day in January, many years ago, I said, there's too much paperwork. I don't think we should bother creating the Center of the American West, and Charles paid no attention to me and said he would go ahead and do the paperwork. So, Charles Wilkinson, co-founder of the Center of the American West. So I am not going to provide the bio of the speaker, because you obviously know who is here because you came here and you came early. And you also have the program. If you're thinking, what did I go to? And who is this guy? And why is everybody else here? You now have a piece of paper that could tell you that. We will start our interview and go for a while, and if time permits, we'll have a few questions. But then we also have the important business of... it just occurs to me that I don't have the citation that I will be reading when it's time for me to read the citation. So if that's in my hands, it will sound better than if I recreate it from memory. I wrote it, so you think I could just
take
say
your word at it.
Yeah.
Right.
And then that lovely citation, this man's wife, Richards Allison, will take that citation and make it absolutely beautiful in calligraphy. And you will get that in the mail. But there's been a funny pattern where people don't want to fly home with a big framed certificate. So that's why you'll get it in the mail.
The TSA is sitting on a lot of those certificates right now.
Yeah, that's right. There's been some tension over that. So we are going to begin with me asking you where you came from. That could have multiple meanings.
You mean in vitro? Are we going back that far?
It's your choice. It's your life.
Let me just say before we start, this is magnificent. What a wonderful crowd. I feel like I'm in like Constitution Hall or something. This is a really terrific place. We're gonna do something lasting and memorable here. I love this space, and this honor is huge and terrific. And I'm from Seattle, and we get really good crowds for writers, but not on nice nights. So I said to Patty, no, it's too nice. No one's going to show up. Because in Seattle, you would never go inside on a nice night like this. So I guess you get this all the time. And thank you for that. Also, I'm so gratified to see, I'm just assuming that you're all lovers of history. And you all love to time travel, as Patty and I do. And you all love to bring the past alive and you know, not quite talk to ghosts as Gifford Pinchot did. But, you know, you love that and you respect that. So it's huge for me, and I'm just, I'm on a cloud being here. I'm also at 5,000 feet, so that's affecting me. So there's the two things going on. Where did I come from? So I'm from a big Irish Catholic family. We didn't have a lot of money. I mentioned this in the class today. But we love the outdoors. I was born in Seattle. I grew up in Eastern Washington. I spent my formative years tramping around Montana and Idaho. And my mother was the most influential person in my life. She always said, we were rich. We Egans, our family of 9 were rich. Why? Because we had public land. Because we own these national forests. We own, all these beautiful places that we would camp. And in our little canvas tent, well, my dad smoked, by the way.
So we can close.
Okay, so the biggest influence on me was my mother. She loved history, and she, if you're Irish and you can't tell a story, you might as well become, Romanian or something, because you've got to learn. I hope I didn't offend any Romanians here. Not that they can't tell stories.
I would say a trigger warning is in order.
Right.
If you're going to do that, you need to say,
go to the safety room after I said that. So she just gave me this love of the written word, love of history, and love of storytelling. And the first book she gave me when I was a little kid was Huck Finn. And she said, and I love it because it was from the point of view of a kid. That all the adults were like, remember those Peanuts cartoons where the adults went, wah, 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 wah? And the kids were the powerful people. And you saw that in Bart Simpson as well. That's what I saw in Huck Finn. And, he's with a runaway slave and all the adults are corrupt. And I love that book. It changed my life. And so journalism allowed me to see the world. Journalism was a ticket to interview the powerful and the everyday people, and to go to wildfires and to go to earthquakes. And I was telling someone I was actually in the courtroom when the verdict was read that O.J. Simpson got off. And so I've been in all these Zelig-like moments I've just been dropped into. I was on the Yellowstone wildfire. And so family influence was huge, and then journalism gave me this ticket to see and be a part of the world and to have a voice.
So, just because it is such an excellent thing, could you describe the dinner table in your family's home and the activities of conversation?
Competition for both food and words. So, pass the peas by the time they got down to a certain section. So, you were very smart in discerning this today when we were talking about this, that the competition itself made me a better storyteller. So you would get more table space if you could tell a story compactly and well, and sometimes even a true story would really help. So you learn to make stuff up too. So the dinner table was just the cacophony. We didn't have this, now son, you may speak. It was just like, everyone was speaking at once, and we were telling our stories, and we would say what happened in our day, and we would go back and forth, and we would be praised for something witty. And witty was the big thing. If you could end a story on a punchline, that was a big deal.
Any early encounters with poetry that might have been influential over time?
So she's leading the witness here.
Right.
But it is a story that's a true story. As I said, it's a quote from Henry Kissinger, who once told one of these long stories, and he said, and this has the added value of being true. And this was true. I mean, I was a little kid, and I was small, and it took me for a while to get my growth spurt, and my teeth hadn't come in yet. I'm a little kid with missing teeth and small kid and a squeaky high voice. And I wanted to be a football player, of all things. I thought I could play for Notre Dame. I still sort of think I could be eligible. I could kick, I guess. And I wrote this poem. And the nun called me up. And it was a poem. I grew up in Spokane. The winters were very long. And I remember seeing the little sprout of a pine tree just coming through the snow. So that sort of mesmerized me. So I wrote this poem about the little sapling of the seed opening in the pine tree coming through. It wasn't really metaphysical or anything, but it rhymed. And I went up with my little kid, my little uniform, and my missing teeth, and did my poem. And afterward, all these girls came up to me. And I go, I love your poem. And I was like, yeah, maybe there's something to this writing stuff.
Well, my sense is that we have a number of things in common, and one of them is that long, steady spells of concentration in a methodical way that we may not be in that game plan.
Right.
And so you have said that you were in that sort of ADD thing. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you and I had been medicated out of our...
No, that's a great question. There was once a really terrific... I'm sorry, I'm going to be mildly offensive here, but there was a terrific cartoon in the New Yorker once that showed Van Gogh on meds. And he's drawing smiley buttons. And... I was clearly one of those kids because I was so hyper and I just bounced around all over the house and all over outside and had all these who now would have been medicated and just God knows what I would have been thinking of. Were you the same way?
Yes.
We have so much in common, too.
It's uncanny. It's uncanny. Right. And to stick with that just for one last round, but shy? Is there a chance? Where were you on that?
So what gave me power was a notebook. I was really shy. I was really afraid to go up to strangers and talk to them, but I had this mask of journalism. And I realized early on that with that notebook, I could ask questions that I wouldn't normally ask without the notebook. Now, that's sort of assuming a character, because you're the character. And Janet Malcolm famously said, every journalist, if he is honest with himself, is a con man, because you're trying to get someone to tell their secrets. I think that's a little harsh, but it has an element of truth to it. But what drew me out of my shyness was having this notebook and being able to ask questions.
Okay, so born in Seattle.
Yes, born in Seattle, then grew up in Spokane. So I have the east side and the west side. And Spokane is basically, it's, red America. It's, the west side is blue America. But when I grew up, it was really immigrant. It was second generation Irish and Italian kids. And Native Americans were in my school as well. So it had the west. It had all they'd come for the railroads, basically. So it had immigrant kids, second-generation immigrant kids, and a fair Native population, too, who came from Montana and elsewhere. So I always had Native Americans in my classroom as well.
Today, there was a moment where a little clump of people from Spokane found you. Mm-hmm. And those of us who were not from Spokane were instantly excluded and isolated.
Right. Well, now, unfortunately, Spokane is now known for this woman who's a white Lutheran who pretended to be a black for a while. Oh, Rachel told us all. And my brother sent me this note when this came out. He said, of all the Spokane things, this is the Spokaniest. So we do sort of live. But my one little footnote to that is my grandfather went to school at Gonzaga University. And Gonzaga University, known now for basketball, their most famous to this day student, he never graduated, was Bing Crosby. And he was a roommate of my grandfather's. And so I grew up hearing about Bing Crosby, what a bastard he was, because he stole my grandfather's girlfriend, and he never studied, and he was just in the saloons going boo boo boo, singing. And then when I was older, I read this biography of Bing Crosby. It was the first of 3 volumes. It's like an 800-word, and it said he was the blackest white guy of the 1930s, straight out of Spokane.
No wonder there's such spirit around that. Let's just go straight to the fact that Providence started you in the West, and then staying in the West was your choice, although the New York Times does make other choices about making people move around. It's sort of like the priesthood or like the national park system or something. You are not supposed to just be in one place. So the New York Times is not really like the priesthood. As I think about it now, that was not the right
I don't think there's anyone celibate there.
Well, that's the start of it. That's the beginning of the list. We'll make a longer list privately and put it on our. We'll do blogs about that. That'll be pretty fun. So would you do the story of your entry into that league of the big league journalism and how you were able to defy those forces of entropy and movement?
And again, she's sort of leading the witness, but I'm going to go off message here a little bit.
When I did Ted Turner, he answered every question spot on.
Ted Turner isn't here now, is he?
No, it was a rodeo. I was a bull rider, and I wasn't sitting on the bull at that time. So
go on. So I like to say some of the breaks that have happened to me in life are just purely accidental. The Dust Bowl, I was the accidental historian. I was doing a series for the New York Times on the collapse of small town America. And I would just hear these wonderful, wonderful stories in these dying little towns of people who were in their 90s and have now left the planet, but held in their soul the last first-person accounts of what the worst environmental disaster was like. And I just weep after hearing these stories. And I saw the arc of a parable, a book in the form of a parable. My big break in journalism was I actually got out of journalism. I worked for the Seattle PI, then a morning daily. Did a lot of stuff, and it was fine. But then I said, now I'm going to be a serious writer. So I quit at the age of 28, and I spent an entire year going through my whole savings, writing every day, and just trying to become a writer. I had my little K-Pro computer, which was built by the Army for the M1 tank. It was indestructible if it ever took a hit. And I was trying to find my voice, which is what writers have to do. Someone gave me this great advice, said, you want to be a literary ventriloquist, try on different voices. So I would try on different things. I'd say, one day I'm smartass, and the other day I'm super serious, omniscient voice of God. So what got me back into journalism, the New York Times opened a bureau in the Pacific Northwest for the first time. They found it on the map. Northwest Territories, out there with Alaska and stuff. And we talked today about geographical literacy, which is, I know this is recorded and I'm going to get in trouble, but who cares? They really suffer from geographical literacy in New York. They don't know where Alaska is. They don't know where anything is. So I was stringing, which is where you do freelance articles for this new New York Times bureau. And then my great break was the worst environmental disaster, the Exxon Valdez. The ship broke up in 1989 and spilled 10 million gallons of crude oil into one of those beautiful places on the planet, Prince William Sound, and they said, how soon can you get up to Alaska? I went there, I wrote a series of page one stories, and then they hired me afterward. But then, of course, they made me come into New York so they could just squeeze the Western kid out of me. And everybody around me was Harvard, Yale, Princeton. There was a woman from the University of Michigan. I was University of Washington. We were defiantly, proudly the public university kids, and we felt we could just write circles around these little ivies. Sorry. I said this to a Yale grad here, But, it's the Western chip on your shoulder. Stegner had it. Norman MacLean had it. I have it. I mean, I've been writing for a New York paper for 30 years. I still have a chip on my shoulder.
Wow. Which shoulder is that? Oh, well, that's interesting. We'll go to comparisons on our experiences on some other occasion. But, okay, so the West, you draw often in your remarks about why you're in the West and what you're doing in the West, the importance of public lands. Mm-hmm. But you also hit the cities, Western cities, right, and the urban majority of the West. So reflect on that.
So the one sort of crazy thing I did, in 1997, I took a year off and we moved to Italy. And we lived in this little town in the Chianti Classico region, which is the oldest designated wine region in the world since 1612 or something. That little black rooster on the Chianti bottle. So we're in the heart of this magnificent area in Tuscany and live in the first floor is a tenant farmer who makes wine. And I'm writing a book about the West called Lasso of the Wind. And, spaghetti westerns, I guess, books about the West. And what really made me... I had all these epiphanies living away from the U.S. and seeing that public land really is a big deal. That we would go for these hikes in the Chianti region. We had to get permission from the landowners. They were all land rich and cash poor. People wanted to hunt, and that was an exhaustive thing to go birding. You'd have to, get the permission to be on someone's land and this and that. And it made me realize again what my mother had said. It sort of came back to me that I was rich, that I had a little piece of this as a part of the democracy. But the other thing was that these cities in the West are all brand new. So in Florence, which was our closest town, we got to know all these Florentines, and they would so complain that Florence was a Renaissance Disneyland, that they had to live the theme park, that if you so much wanted to change your window, you would have to spend 3 years with the Bureau of Changed Windows to have the perfect Renaissance window. And I realized that the great thing about the Western cities was they would just build these things out of scratch. They're just tabula rasas. They're all brand new. With the exception, and I always point this out, especially after doing the Curtis book, of Acoma, New Mexico. Don't let anyone ever tell you that St. Augustine, Florida is the oldest continuously inhabited place in the United States. It's not. Acoma, New Mexico has been continuously occupied for at least 1,000 years, and scholars, even ones who dislike you and I, agree on that. So anyway, I started to see these cities in a different... it's all about possibility. It's all about, we're not bound to the past. We're not bound to the landed gentry. We're not bound to, my father came over on the Mayflower. It was all this, and Tom Robbins, the writer, once told me something about, he came from Virginia, and he said, writers come to the West, and the further they get west, the more they drop their personal baggage. It's the sort of, Oregon Trail metaphor that you get rid of everything. First the Oregon, then the family heirlooms. Finally, you dump the Bible. You're like, well, I'm out here, might as well be an atheist. And And in fact, the founder of Seattle Doc Maynard was a bigamist, had 2 wives. No one even knew it for most of his life. So, I mean, there's this...
The 2 wives knew.
Yeah, that's true. Very good. They did know. You're right. So, I started to look at the cities. The 2 things that inform the West are public land, that we do live, but we're also the most urban part of the United States. A higher percentage of Westerners live in classified urban areas than any other part of the United States. In fact, upstate New York is far more rural than most of the West. So we're people who live in cities surrounded by glorious public land, and that informs the way we look at ourselves, I think. Also, one more thing, I'm sorry I'm going on too long on this. The sense of possibility, the sense of frontier, the sense of why not try this, really goes to our business culture as well. That I think the great startups of California, the Starbucks of my city, all these places that started here, is because why don't we just try something new? Who cares that if it failed somewhere else? Why don't we just try something new? It goes to our art, it goes to our writing, it goes to the way we look at, I mean, whether you think it's a good thing or not. Colorado and Washington were the first states to legalize marijuana. Wyoming was the first state to allow women to have the vote. Montana was the first state to have a total populace written into their constitution. Big money will not rule. They're still fighting with the Supreme Court over the influence of money on their elections. So I think that really informs that sense of why not try something different.
And since you mentioned innovation in writing, and since we were speaking of going to the Northeast and finding centers of power that were not tuned. So my first interview with Harvard, where I did get to be an assistant professor, but the Southern historian said to me, there's 3 professors in a hotel suite, and David Donald said to me, Patricia, we're just curious, why would you go into this backwater of a field? And I thought, you're a Southern historian and you're asking, I'm sorry. So it was an interesting stance, and it was just assumed that Western History Association population was dwindling. So that's the way it was. And then a literary renaissance came over us, fiction and nonfiction, and certainly Wallace Stegner was a key to that. Ivan Doig, speaking at a memorial for Wallace Stegner, said that the first time the New York Times finally referred to Wallace Stegner, they called him William Stegner.
Right.
And Ivan Doig said, and I thought, out here we pronounce that Wallace.
Right. I mean, his heirs are still pissed because his National Book Award book did not even get reviewed.
Is that right?
Right.
Well, so it was like that. And then Mr. Stegner stayed on it, and Norman MacLean came into the picture. And then it sort of looks as if we were all part of a movement.
Right.
But it was the communication system of our movement was flawed, since we hadn't met each other and didn't know we would be.
Right.
So talk about that.
Yeah, I'm really glad. It just occurred to me listening to you talk, which happens quite a bit when I listen to you talk. I have these minor thought bubbles.
That was a kind remark.
Right. That when I was trying to write my first book about my home, the Pacific Northwest, I thought the histories that we had really sucked. They were basically great railroad man built railroad, and there's his statue at the University of Washington. And then the natives were vanquished, and we leveled all the hills and dammed all the rivers. And it was this really terrible. And then Boeing came along. I'm sorry. And it was this really terrible history. Not only was it boringly written, and I don't think there's any such thing as boring history. I only think there's boringly told history. But it was just a terrible narrative for people. And I thought, so I wanted to write something different, something that was from the point of view of the land itself. That I found this great book called The Canoe and the Saddle, written in 1853. The first book written about the Northwest, where this Winthrop, who was an heir of the great Winthrop family of the Northeast, and remember, slavery was raging, tearing the nation apart. The rivers were all polluted in the Northeast. The industrialization was happening. Little kids were working in factories. The American experiment looked like it was failing, or at least falling apart. He comes to the Pacific Northwest, Theodore Winthrop was his name, and he sees this, wow, this is a possibility to still do something great in this country. And he sees it from the point of view of the land, so I followed this ghost. But as I was preparing that book, you were publishing Legacy of Conquest, and all this, we were getting new narratives. We weren't, you're just a cowboy, and if you don't fit into the cowboy, you don't fit. There were a couple of narratives that you had to inhabit as a Westerner. And suddenly, all these new ideas, I felt like it was a golden time to be writing about the West, because doors were open. And the Montana writer, you mentioned him earlier, he wrote...
Bill Kittredge.
Bill Kittredge, right, thank you. He said something, and I always credit him with the quote. He said, the search now, and it's a good search, and every Westerner goes through this, is to find a narrative that you can inhabit. And it can include Native American history, because, I mean, people say, oh, you can't study Native American history, it's all for the Native Americans. No, I reach into the Nez Perce. I love certain things I find from Nez Perce history or from Blackfeet, in the same way that, you know, I just did this Irish American book. Blackfeet should be able to reach into all this Gaelic being spoken in the mines of Butte. Those histories blend. Those stories have similarities. Just not to go off on this, but just one point. So I did this Irish American book. It's my new book. And the story of the Irish is basically about Great Britain trying to take everything from a people over the course of 700 years. So they took their language. Gaelic was outlawed. They took their religion. Roman Catholicism was outlawed. They made it a crime to play their sport, which was hurling. They actually outlawed hurling. They made it a crime to play the harp. So why is the harp on the Guinness bottle? Because it was a martyr's instrument. It was an outlaw instrument. Queen Elizabeth famously said in the 15th century, hang the harpers wherever they are found. So then I start looking at, my character comes to Montana as the territorial governor. And he's given this assignment by William Tecumseh Sherman to go after the natives. And he sees the same thing happening. What are we doing to the natives? We're taking their language. We're taking their religion. Oh, I forgot land. 80% of the Irish were living as tenant farmers, having been kicked off after Cromwell and other invasions. So you see this story of the Irish repeating itself in the story of how, and my character is then, he's not even a character, he's a historical figure, is forced to enforce this, go after and do everything to the Indians that the British had done to the Irish. So I don't know how I got off on this tangent.
It seems good, and it allows me to point out that one of your predecessors for the Stegner Award is Billy Frank. Mm-hmm. And you might just take a moment to make, not everyone was necessarily there for that event, though lots were, but what it means to you to be in a sequence with Billy Frank, and how you think of Billy Frank in the larger picture of civil rights in the United States if you go Western and look at the big picture.
Before I came to accept this wonderful award, I just looked at all the predecessors and my God, I don't know, why a club like this would let me in, but that's a Groucho Marx line, isn't it?
Or you wouldn't want to join the club.
Right, join the club. Sorry about that. Right. I'm not a joiner. But one of my heroes, in journalism you're not supposed to take sides, but I am now an opinion writer, so I can take sides. And one of my heroes was Billy Frank Jr. And he was from a long line of Nisqually natives who, now this urban area grew up around them, the metro area of 3 million people, but they fought for what was in their treaty, which basically guaranteed the native people the right to 50% of the catch of salmon and other fish. And he started out, he was basically the Nelson Mandela of Native Americans. He started out very angry, very, not violent, but they broke the law. They were in jail frequently. And then he became, like Mandela, he sort of brought a larger audience into it. And now, these fisheries wars are long gone, and it's largely because he was one of these greater souls. He was an evolved spirit. He was one of these people that saw, like Mandela, he saw beyond his original anger and his original rage that he'd seen everything was lost. Everything was lost except for a few salmon coming back to his river. It was called Frank's Landing on the Nisqually, wedged between this huge metro area. And only pulse of life that was the same as 1,000 years ago were a few anadromous fish coming up that river. And that's what he fought for. And he made that struggle. Everyone in the Northwest struggled. He went outside of the native struggle on that. So, he's that rare person in history who could go beyond his tribe.
And it certainly is a reminder that the civil rights movement does have so many dimensions that involve Indian people, Mexican American people. So we're going to use that as a transition. So I'm going to tell you really good news. You have, this is not going to be news, you have yourself written many things to remind us of that larger picture of civil rights when the West is included. Mm-hmm. So the really good news is that there are a bunch of young academics who have been writing about the Western civil rights movement and its many different ethnic variations. That's the really good news. The news is that most of those books are published by university presses or in articles in academic journals that you don't subscribe to, I think. So what do you make of that? If I tell you that there's a thriving terrain in academic history and it is not reaching the wider world. What thoughts does that bring to mind?
So one of the epic stories I covered for the New York Times were the timber wars. Remember the spotted owl? So there was this big fight over, the law said you had to protect the species. This species happened to live in some of the oldest forests left in the United States, which were on public land. And it was a great struggle because it had cultural things going on as well. And I came to realize that the people who really knew what they were talking about were the scientists, were the foresters, the biologists. They could tell about this wonderful, complex web of life that existed in these old growth forests. In fact, they found one of the great treatments for breast cancer in the yew tree. And this was something they were just sort of plowing away, what they find in rainforests when they do it. So I found myself more and more not going to the advocates of either side, the timber people versus the enviros, and going to the scientists at the universities. And what was great about it was they were willing to mix it up in the public debate. This was a huge thing. I mean, President Clinton came out and convened a timber summit, and it was going to affect how we all live in our public lands. And these scientists who know more than anyone, now they weren't versed in public policy, were getting involved with the fight. So I'm a huge fan of that. I always said, you guys should do it more. You should go to the public hearings. You should write op-eds. Cut to history. Similar group of brilliant people who know more about a subject than all but 4 other people, and they're only talking to the 4 other people. And that's my gripe with academia. So occasionally, and I'm sorry to say this because it hurts still, you remember the bad reviews. I've gotten a couple bad reviews, and they've always been from academics who said, he doesn't recognize the scholarship on this, or it wasn't peer-reviewed, and I'm just like, I'm trying to reach a wide audience. I want history to be felt by all. This is our story. This is the American story. We're better citizens if we know the past. I mean, we're better citizens dealing with the current debate about Mexicans and immigration if you understand, how the Irish were treated in the 1850s. They called them everything they call the Mexicans right now. And people have forgotten about the Know-Nothing Party, which at one point, that really was their formal name. Not a good title. Let's call ourselves the Know-Nothings. They said it because when they were interrogated, they did a lot of vandalism. They burned down Irish neighborhoods. There were actually pogroms against Irish neighborhoods in Philadelphia, and they burned churches and firehouses. They said, if you're ever caught, tell them you know nothing. So they were at one point the second biggest party in the United States. They're the only party in our history that was founded in opposition to a single ethnic group, that being the Irish. So I'm a huge believer of, we know these stories, and your students and the students here and your colleagues know these better than anyone, but crossing the line, getting outside of your boundaries.
April 13th, 2016 is going to be historic because before your eyes, Tim Egan and I are going to negotiate a new alliance between what we will call the academic historians and the getting to history by a somewhat different career route historians.
But you need a better name for us. That doesn't, we need a better title than that. Can we be like the cool historians? Sorry.
Well, I'm clearly trying not to say the popularizers.
Right, I know, I do.
So I'm actually trying to give you a very clumsy name in order to spare you the stupid name of popularizers. And now you have escalated to the cool historians, and I don't know what to do with that. Okay. And a young woman a student at a gathering we had earlier referred to Tim as someone who does what academic historians try to do, but he does it much better. And we won't name that young woman because that's not going to go over well.
And she'll never get tenure if it's found out
yeah,
that she
that's
said
right.
that.
So, actually, now that I think about it, it was a young man. Don't you think we need to do a little transgender work here? So, okay, so some young person said that. The dream here is that we will, as I think we fully have between us, negotiated this peace that I am based in a university. I have tenure.
Right.
You don't.
I have a book on the bestseller list right now.
Yes. Actually, we stopped short of the fact that I was about to say that your sales are considerably
But that's not the measurement of success.
No, but our wonderful mutual friend Richard White, whose brother Stephen White writes the mysteries set here. Richard's and Stephen's mother, while she was still with us, would always say, Richard is very much an academic, Stephen writes mysteries, and she would always say, Stephen writes real books. Basically, Richard writes books that people have to read assigned in classes, I guess, which is not, in fact, a fair characterization of Richard. So now we're going back to this peace alliance that we will negotiate, and I think it's negotiated, really, and we will declare a peace because, as you say, amnesia is very bad. Historical amnesia is not working well for the nation, and it's too consequential, and it's too injurious to have the amnesia. So rather than divide against each other as cool historians and academic historians, so that's okay.
You're not going to let that go.
No, but it's better than popularizer. It's much better than my title that I offered you. So that we must be in an alliance. We must be in a coalition, because what we're doing, last year we had the Rocky Mountain Rescue Group. Those people work in teams. Those people do not say, I'm going off alone to take this on. So we are going to make sure that we have negotiated this peace, and I think we have, and then we are going to take up the cause of persuading our comrades to sign on to that peace treaty.
And is this by the power vested in you as the state historian of Colorado, which you know she is?
Yes, it's that, and it's also the power of...
Can you perform marriages with that title too?
Not lasting ones.
Good.
I don't know. It's not come out right. I did. Actually, that's not true. Two young people at the university, two engineering students, did have me. I just did officiate, and that's a very lasting marriage. So I certainly had that wrong. I performed very lasting marriages, but it's really by the power vested in me as the official university fool that I would be. Okay. That's probably more the debate. Well, let's let that go. Not the fool's thing. But we could do this.
Right.
We could declare this peace. Have we declared the peace? Are we?
Let's do it. Hands across the water, right. It's for common love of history is what it is, and for not ever telling boring history.
I may not have been able to pull this. I had to write stuff. I had to write stuff for the academic world. Okay, so that we can get pardons and paroles for people who had to do that. That's important. But really, reviewing for this evening, and I did work hard on, it wasn't work, I did play hard at reviewing stuff. I really got, I read individual books as they came out, but I got a real sense of the craft of what you're doing. And the artistry with which you select and place and reflect on quotations, it's really something. And it goes, well, there you are. Okay, well, let's go. So, to say, I can't speak that language anymore, but I'll try to imitate it. That you are, well, you said the reviews, where the academics say, Mr. Egan fails to reckon with the...
And it's the worst kind of review, I think, is to, instead of reviewing the book you wrote, you review the book the reviewer would have wrote. Yeah. If he'd only noted this or this or this, I said, no, this is not your book, reviewer. Right. Review the book.
Right. So the craft and the artistry and the thought and the... not to give one a line that you might be about to use, well, just the way that you get much more material than you end up being able to use, and you reduce that to a shape and a size and a fleetness and nimbleness and so on. So what I don't think I realized until earlier today, is how much you simply do what academic historians do in terms of how much time that you begin in archives, and really reviewing your work. I just was knocked over by how you were clearly, this is a technical phrase that we had before the marijuana legislation, but you are higher than a kite when you get a primary source.
You really are.
Yeah. No. So you are really one intoxicated person.
And you just live for an untold story. And that's the way I felt about the Dust Bowl. Now, we were talking about this earlier. I wasn't the first person to write the Dust Bowl story, but Steinbeck got the first take with Grapes of Wrath. And so when I was looking at my son's high school AP history book, there was one paragraph out of, 800 pages, and I hope you didn't have anything to do with this, on the Dust Bowl. worst environmental disaster of our time, worst economic collapse, worst displacement of people until Hurricane Katrina came along, because 1 million people left, but 2 million stayed behind, and it merits one paragraph. And I was so touched by the resilience of the people itself, and you're absolutely right. So I'm high on having an original story. I felt an original story because I was getting it from the survivors. But that's what you live for. And in this Irish story, it started with a statue. So my hero, Thomas Francis Moore, and he was a hero to me, and I'm not being that fair and balanced because I wanted to write a big, ripping story about a life with all its flaws and everything. He was the most famous Irish American till JFK came along, probably. And he's just disappeared from the mist of time. And I got it all from a statue. There's a statue in front of Helena, Montana, in front of their capital, of Thomas More. And I asked the governor who it was, and he said, he shamed me as an Irish American. He said, you don't know who that is? And I didn't realize what great history is. So yes, you live for this, largely this new stuff, that some story you can tell. And I think also the same, whether you're an academic historian or whatever your long, whatever your term was, which wasn't cool, historian, that we're the same in that maybe I'm wrong with this, but this is what I believe, at the core, we are storytellers. We are storytellers. We see life, we see nations, we see Native Americans were really good at this. Curtis realized, he said, boy, every tribe, even the smallest tribe, has their own creation myth. We need narrative. And so whether you're academic or whether you're popular, whether you're...
Well, what I had here, I should have used it's only a few words.
Okay.
Alternative career route historians.
Oh, yes. That sounds so sexy, too. Right? I'm the alternative career route historian. I'm your waiter tonight. The fish is really good. What I think we have in common is we really do want to tell stories, and we do really have holy cow moments where we say, God, this is amazing. And if I can only get this out, people will look at things differently.
But you were a real primary source guy.
Right, so that's the journalism, and that's where I think, so I can learn from your colleagues a lot about understanding, what's been written and what the archival material is and how to place it in context. And I think you can learn a lot from my crowd, the sort of walking around. I mean, I am always interested in texture, and I couldn't describe those Dust Bowl storms I couldn't describe the loneliness of the women who wrote these powerful diaries of being alone on the prairie. It's just powerful without feeling the wind itself. And I think you have to get out of your office and go down to the high plains and see what it's like, when the sky just turns on you. And somebody told me something early on when I was doing that research. They said, there's down here in West Texas, there's 7 things that can come from the sky and they can all kill you. And I never heard that about the Pacific Northwest. So that was a real changer for me to just try to understand that.
So, but it is, you work many sources, and
right.
I think my people underestimate how much time you spend with primary sources.
Right.
Although the division between primary source and talking to living human being is more of a porous border for you. So if you would talk about people bringing out shoeboxes.
Right, so to me there was always the only way I can describe this is magical. So I'm going from town to town. I'm the traveling accidental Dust Bowl historian, looking for stories, setting up my little minstrel shop in these dying towns and trying to find people who were alive in the 1930s. And they were just coming of age. So I would meet with almost all women because the men have died. And the men, by the way, I'm sorry to say this is a violation of my sex, they're just not good storytellers. They would sit there with their hands crossed and say, well, it was bad. And the women would go, yeah, I remember exactly. It was a Sunday at 10 o'clock, and I had this new dress on. I was looking outside, and then it was I had something on the stove, and they just this great detail. But then my heart sank, and I just go on. It would be this great detail. But for me, a magical moment would be they would trust me enough. I'd be sitting in someone's home, running my tape recorder, letting them talk. And again, everyone wants to tell their story. It's human. You don't want to go to your grave without telling your story. But there would always come a moment, or there would occasionally come a moment, where one of these women would go back and take a long time and come back in the closet and open a shoebox. And out of the shoebox would pop story, power, diaries, letters, pictures, living history. So I mentioned this in the class today. It's a writing tip. People say, I try to write my nonfiction as a novel. I try to write it seamlessly, textually, here or there. And they say, how could you possibly know what Dorothy McGillicuddy was thinking at 10 o'clock in the morning in 1932 when this duster rolled in? I said, I had her diary. And she told the world what she was thinking, and then I would incorporate that into the internal monologue as I'm describing the characters. So as she's looking out at this, I could describe what she was thinking because I did the research of the shoebox. And that's, to me, that was, as a researcher, that's the most mad. Now, in this Irish story, everyone's dead, obviously. It was the Victorian age. But what I did that really helped me was, so I went to his home in Waterford, where he was a prince of Waterford. He had everything going for him. He gave it all up to fight Great Britain, the mightiest empire on the planet, and ended up getting sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered for that. But I went to his jail cell, Kilmainham. In Ireland, there's two great places that tourists are drawn to. They're pubs and jails. And in both places you hear basically the same story. In one place they sing it, the other. It's always about those bastards, the Brits, and what they did, the martyrs. And there's stories of loss and martyrdom. But so I went to his jail cell and sat in his cell and saw the little 10-inch by 12-inch place where the sun could come in when he would get sun. Now, one thing I didn't know, and I realized this when I was in his cell, that when they built Kilmainham Jail in Dublin, where my character waited his execution, Queen Victoria later commuted the sentence, and he was banished for life to Tasmania. When I went to his cell, when they built this jail, it was supposed to be a model jail, but it was built of limestone. And Dublin is like Seattle; it's very misty, wet. So the limestone itself was porous. So the water would come in on the other side. And I wrote this line saying, the walls themselves would weep. Because all the prisoners would talk about the moisture coming in on the inside of it. But my point is that you can read all you want about Thomas More in the National Library of Ireland, in the Montana Historical Society. Great stuff. But there's nothing like sitting in his cell to understand what a 25-year-old kid with the world, who had had the world at his feet beforehand, awaiting to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, must have felt than sitting in his cell. So that's my sort of research tip. After you've done all the other stuff, go try to experience as much of it as you can.
The slogan of the Center of the American West is turning hindsight into foresight, which is easier said than done. Could you just take a minute or two to reflect on, and you might use wildlands fire, you might use public lands management. Well, actually, let's go with fire. What is that too ambitious and dreamy a notion that there's...
No, because I think I came to this conclusion a couple of years ago. After I'd written the book on Fire, The Big Burn, I came to this conclusion that the number one concern of all Westerners from here to however long we're able to stay alive on this planet is going to be wildfire. If you have this horrible beetle infestation, which you've seen across the West, and that's the direct result of climate change. These beetles winter over, so they kill the trees that normally would be able to survive. So anyone who's gotten around has seen these vast swaths of red, standing, dead ghost forests. And there's a certain time in the life of those dead forests, Stephen Pine, the great fire ecologist, told me this, when they're just the most vulnerable things in the world, they're fuel. And when the Forest Service was founded, they didn't want it here. I mean, the Westerners were like, well, you're going to come in and regulate the public land. Now, people really want to live next to a national forest. 25 million people live within a mile of a national forest. It's loved to death. But fire is the number one threat of that. And we don't often see that we live within this larger ecology. So when I was doing The Big Burn, I originally got into it because it was a cruel fire book. I just wanted to write about this, the way that Eric Lesson wrote about the Galveston flood. Here's the biggest known wildfire in American history. 3 million acres burn in a weekend. So an area the size of Connecticut burns in actually less than 36 hours' time. We've never had anything like this in our history. And then I got into this great backstory. And Gifford Pinchot, founder of the Forest Service, you think he was a wealthy man, but he also was in love with a ghost for 18 years. Teddy Roosevelt.
You might just annotate that a tiny bit, because
Yes.
most of us are not in love with ghosts, and it might be helpful to know how to do it, should we ever want to do it of it.
Pinchot was Teddy Roosevelt's top domestic aide, and the love of his life, like the love of Teddy Roosevelt's life, he lost his wife, and she died on Valentine's Day, 1884, the same day that Teddy Roosevelt lost his mother, and he famously said, "The light has gone out of his life." Both these young men lost the loves of their life. Roosevelt moved on and married someone else. Pinchot never did until late in life. So he sort of started to see her again. And one of the great secrets of his life was in his diaries, he would write, had lunch with the president, met the King of England, etc. And then at the end of it, he would say, not a bright day, clouds were out. And he wasn't giving a weather annotation. He was talking about whether he saw Laura. He would actually put a chair out for her, like Harvey, in the movie Harvey, and he would say, "Laura and I had a great evening with the president tonight." And, so he lived, the founder of the Forest Service, TR's top aide, basically had kept this psychic love affair going with a ghost. He would go to seances, which were a really big deal, which sort of changes your view of the founder of the Forest Service. They could never figure out why. These young foresters would say, Pinchot came to Montana and he hung out with the Rangers, he was a great guy, and then he would go off and sleep by himself, far away. He wouldn't sleep with the other Rangers in the camp. And we now know because he wanted to try to summon Laura. So one more thing on this, it's really interesting. Both TR and Pinchot mentioned this in their diaries. They claim, and it's a disputable claim, that they founded the concept of conservation. Now certainly they used the political bully pulpit and to give us the public land that we all cherish, our national parks, our national forests, against a reluctant Congress. But whether they founded conservation, John Muir, there were so many strings that went into that. But they both said that that the thought sort of happened, it sort of merged from these long walks that they would have in Rock Creek Park, and then they would actually skinny dip in the Potomac at the end of some of these walks. And I was trying to imagine, when I was writing this book, George Bush was president, and Carl Rowe was his chief aide. And I had this image of Rowe swimming in the Potomac, naked and sinking, actually. Now, Roosevelt told this great story where once the French ambassador was with them, and Doris Kearns Goodwin stole this from me. And so they're doing one of these vigorous walks where they would run a 9-mile walk up and down Rock Creek Park. And then they said, come on, now we're going to go for a swim. This is on a November day when it was 38 degrees. They take off all their clothes, Pinchot and Roosevelt jump into the Potomac. And the French ambassador was appalled by this. And so he finally stripped down, and they urged him to do this, but he kept his gloves on. And Roosevelt said, why are you keeping your gloves on? This is in both their diaries. And the French ambassador said, there might be ladies present. So, again, it sort of changed my view of the founders of conservation, that they were, and this is a great thing about history if you go deep into it, they were fascinating human beings. They were weird. Pinchot would now be on meds. He would be considered, I guess, schizophrenic, wouldn't he?
No, that's Mather. Or bipolar. Well, let's not go there. Okay, so Stephen Mather, the founder of the National Park Service, was really a bipolar fellow. And I think Pinchot, I would put more in, was really a character.
Right.
Which I suppose you could be bipolar and be a character. I guess those are not incompatible. But I think that there's a way in which he was Pinchot, well, like Mather, was so functional that it's hard to go into the classification.
And one of the great things about Pinchot, so he founded the Yale School of Forestry. His family made their fortune clear-cutting the state of Pennsylvania. And it's a classic American tale. And then he becomes our founding forester and fights against big timber. He spends his whole life, he basically becomes a Bernie Sanders-like socialist / with a he was a temperance movement guy too. But, so I told the story to Patty earlier. Gifford Pinchot III, the surviving heir of the founding family of the Forest Service, lives in Seattle, and I was a little nervous after the book came out because I portrayed Pinchot in all his eccentricities. And somebody finally got us together, and he's this gentleman with a Van Dyke beard, and I shake his hand and I ask him what he thought of the book and how I portrayed his grandfather. And he said, well, he sort of looked away with this patrician look. He said, you made him out to be only slightly more daft than family lore had it. love that word daft because it's an old school. And we're like, you know.
Well, on that note, the City of the American West does have a humor initiative to look at how humor can be the WD-40 of tense and difficult situations, and also just find common ground and camaraderie in unexpected ways, disarm opponents. We had Bob Mankoff, the cartoon editor of The New Yorker, here as our first humor speaker, and he actually felt that I was too cheerful in my interpretations of what humor does for us, and he reminds us that humor can be used in a very cruel, brutal manner. So I don't want to hide that. It's been a long time since I was called a Pollyanna, but I did get called that by Mr. Mankoff, which is a great honor to have call me that. But I would like to talk about your sense of humor a little bit, and I would like to ask first if J.P. Morgan is funny.
So Morgan appears in my Curtis book, and he's the de facto Federal Reserve before we had a Federal Reserve Bank. Morgan was the wealthiest banker, and so whenever they had a crash, they would go to Morgan and say, what are we going to do about the money supply right now? And he had this fortress down on Wall Street. I say he was in his 70s, he was a collector of Renaissance paintings and young mistresses. And I'm not really sure he had a sense of humor, except for he probably was not good for American Indians at all. This doesn't go to your humor question at all, but he helped to consolidate the railroads. That was his big break as a banker. And that did more than anything accelerate the decline of native lands. So when Curtis comes to him, he's trying to do this story that will, this thing that will sort of revive people who they think are going to disappear. Because the census shows that the Indian population is down 99% from what it was estimated at the time of contact to only 250,000 natives entirely, the whole U.S., down from perhaps 20 million or counting. So he finally goes to Morgan, and Morgan just turns him down on all these things. And finally, Morgan sees this one picture that draws him and says, okay, I like that. It's a woman who's 11 years old called Mojave. And that starts Morgan down the road to doing this. But Morgan got the headline he wanted the next day in the New York Times. It said, Morgan money to keep Indians alive. Right. So it was, here's a guy who had done more now, but I wasn't sure where you were going with, because I didn't find much about his sense of humor.
No, it wouldn't be his sense of humor, but he might be funny to us. So that famous story, it's about Anne Morrow Lindbergh when she was a child, and her mother had J.P. Morgan over to visit for tea, and he had a bad case of rosacea, and so his nose was very big and red. And so Anne Morrow, when she was a child, would always say the first thing that came to her mind. And so her mother worked and worked and worked on her that she was not to refer to Mr. Morgan's nose. She was not to refer to Mr. Morgan's nose. So the children are gathered for tea with Mr. Morgan, and Anne Morrow's mother pours tea for Mr. Morgan, and she has gone over this so many times with her daughter, and she hands the cup to Mr. Morgan, and she says, Mr. Morgan, would you like cream in your nose?
So that's funny, because that is Curtis was warned about the nose. He had this really mottled nose. It was very red and inflamed, and so he wrote a letter home. He just said to himself, "Don't think about the nose. Don't look at the nose. Don't think about the nose." And he said, "Make eye contact. Don't look at the nose. Keep it there."
Right. So that's not that Morgan would find that funny. Probably wouldn't. But there's something funny. This is very important for a ritual that will be down the road here a little bit. That we establish that there's something kind of light and funny.
Well, and I would just like to say institutions reflect their individuals, and the fact that we're even talking about a humor initiative is entirely because of Patty Limerick, who's one of the great. I think she's one of the great wits. I mean, that's why I was drawn to her. I said, wow, this professor actually has a sense of humor, and she's funny, and she has a sense of timing. She doesn't mind telling a joke before a council of very serious people. I mean, you could still be serious. Your credentials are off the charts, but you have a great sense of humor. And I think your institution, now I'm in the same sense that I wouldn't want to join a club that would have me as a member. I'm not sure I would want to join a humor initiative, because then, it becomes the job of humor.
Oh, good heavens, no. I mean, no, I wouldn't want that. So, because in fact, you, when you say that you really felt that Bart Simpson was the Huckleberry Finn of our times. That seems funny. I wouldn't have thought to say that. In fact, now I'm not even sure I said it exactly right. But the Dalhart booster, if you would, you draw really unexpected and very distinctive to you comparisons with popular culture. So if you could give
right.
us...
So in the Dust Bowl book, there's an individual who's this booster in this town of Dalhart, Texas, where I spent a lot of time. The other town is called Boise City. That's how it's pronounced. It's in Oklahoma. They're both they were ranching towns that sort of sprang to life, and now they're holding on. And McCarty his name was John McCarty. He was this great booster. He looked like a young Orson Welles, and he would give these fiery speeches that this is the best goddamn land under God's sun. I don't care what the press says about it. And then they would come around taking these pictures. And he said, these dusters, I love the smell of dust. I love it. I love it. It's good for us. You know, and people are dying of dust pneumonia while he's saying this. He started this thing called the Last Man's Club, where you took a vow to be the last man ever to leave Dalhart, Texas. When he got a chance to leave Dalhart, he left Dalhart. And several of the people I chronicled died with their last man cards in their wallets. But what Patty's getting to is that I was trying to think of, I often have these pop culture references coming to mind when I'm trying to write, and I thought of the character in the first Jaws movie who says, don't worry about the shark. This is great beach, come on. He tells Roy Scheider, you got to stop. You're scaring away all the tourists. And so to me, the shark was with the storms. And McCarty was the booster, saying, don't worry. And then, of course, they got hit by Black Sunday, which was the biggest duster of all time, and just rolled through it. And McCarty himself shortly thereafter left.
So we are not too far away from when we have to shift to the ritual. I'm paralyzed by the notion of what to do with audience questions because I think I can see... I don't think I can see anybody who doesn't want to ask you a question. So that's a big problem. And I think and we proved at lunch that it goes on and on and on. And there's no place where we say, well, I guess that's all we want to hear from Tim Egan. And I guess that will do it for the evening. So we do have a little crisis of that. I think I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. And I think because of time, I'm not going to be able to do audience participation questions. And ladies and gentlemen, I have worked on planning this, so I have tried to give you, I feel a little bit like I'm editing a collection of writings or something. I've tried to, these are certainly not, we certainly haven't exhausted the greatest hits. This is I don't know how many, that would be like 100 album set if we were doing greatest hits, so that's not going to cover. So I think I'm going to ask you 2 more questions, and one of them I have no idea. I haven't brought this up yet here. So we've got 3 Egans. We've got reporter Egan, op-ed Egan, and historian Egan. And they seem to, speaking of spiritualism and ghosts and so on, they seem to all cohabit here in that entity. But they must collide from time to time, or they must fight with each other, or they must have moments where they're not in harmony.
Well, and if you want to see a real chaos, you should go cook Egan. When I'm trying different things and it doesn't work at all, it's just that you just put way too much garlic in. So thank you for asking, and thanks for the kind words on this. I'm sorry we can't get to the audience. So here's the thing: when you're writing a book, someone once told me that the key to being a writer, especially with fiction, and I've only written 1 novel, is to live the dream. Don't ever let yourself slip out of Victorian times if you're in Victorian times, or 1930s Dust Bowl America. Stay in there. Stay in that environment. And when I'm writing a book, I'm really, really deep into it. I try to write at least 1,000 words a day when I'm doing that. I try to stay really deep and try to stay in the texture, stay in the time. Imagine. Be that era. When I'm writing a column, it's a lot of fun actually, because I sort of assume this persona. You're supposed to be a provocateur. A lot of times, it's not even me. I'm not even sure if I have totally thought it through. In fact, a lot of times I haven't thought it through. But I want to be a provocateur. I'm trying to challenge someone's opinion. I'm trying to throw something out there. I'm trying to say something original and provocative in that little 800-word space. Now, I mean, it's the best piece of real estate in the New York Times to be able to do that. And the difference is that when I was on the national news side, you go through all these layers, you consult with all these editors, and then I got this column 7 years ago, and I can't believe it was 7 years, and they said, just write whatever you want, and no one will edit you, which is astonishing. I mean, now you run out of stuff, of course. So, I've written just some really goofy, silly things, and I've written some very personal things. Wrote about the death of my mother, what it was like to see her slip away in the last hour, and her face, and there's the sunlight on her, and there's something emotional I was trying to work out. No one ever says, what are you writing about? I guess that's why sometimes on the Sunday op-ed page there's 3 people writing about the same thing. They edit for style, but it's a completely different role. And it is like a character in a play. You are a provocateur. I don't feel like I'm that person. I mean, I'm a character. I mean, I'm not a character, but I'm a persona. And I really like it, actually, because when you're a book writer, you spend a fair amount of time, especially in the winter, in your jammies, in your little cubbyhole, writing your history. You're living, this 19th century dream. But when you're a column writer, you're mixing it up with the great, questions of our time. And it's wonderful to be able to have a say. That said, I am the only national opinion writer in the West. And that's a great shame.
Is that true?
Yeah, no one from the Washington Post, no one from the New York Times outside of the Beltway and New York, and I'm considered. I have to carry the whole weight of the Western thought on my fragile shoulders, and I certainly am not the spokesman for the West. I have all these different interests, and I get carried away by different things that I care about. So it's a great honor to be able to write about the West and be the Western point of view, but I'm certainly not the spokesman for the West. But it is hard to. It's not hard to balance those things, because you just slip out of one and slip into the other. And again, there's so much. I'll say this about this presidential campaign. Those little conveyor belts in the hospital cafeteria, and stuff sort of served up and it goes by. I mean, every week some fresh pile of crap is served up from one of these candidates. And so you just want to pick, I'll try the Jell-O this week. I mean, you don't even have to look. There's just something new every week served up. It's, I'm sorry about this. I'm mixing my metaphor too.
Right. No one missed the power of that metaphor. Right. That was really something that really engages the audience and captures their attention, which is really good. So that's why I would never get tenure. I would be kicked out of the meeting. We've established that. Which actually just makes it more and more of a miracle that I got tenure, when you think about it. So, okay, my last question is, I would like you to, I think it's Hazel Lucas, whom you met and talked to and found a story that, I forgot to say that you've told me that 70% or so of the material goes, and you're looking just to parts to the cutting room floor, but you have found, after doing a lot of work, you found the people who will give you the art that you need. And so if you could tell us about Hazel Lucas, and if you could tell about what it meant to her life to have been in your book.
Right. So, there's a slightly different person who's on the other part of that. But Hazel was a woman. When I met her, she was 98.
Oh, I've got the wrong person.
Right. But she's a good story. So she saw the grassland as a little girl, and she told me about getting up on her tippy toes in her wagon, horse-drawn wagon, and looking out of this patch of Oklahoma that would be theirs. They were going to have a homestead on this unturned grass. I mean, Walt Whitman called it the great recurring miracle, the great grassland of America. And she saw this thing as a little kid. She started out in a sod house. She rose to be the 17-year-old teacher, that's how old she was, in the one-room sod house schoolhouse where she taught all 8 grades. She lost her first child in a dust storm, and when they went to bury her, Black Sunday kept the funeral from happening. They all had to dive under their cars they're all in their Sunday clothes best. Her second child, Charles, who I got to know pretty well, said, all my life I was claustrophobic, and I could never figure it out until my mother told me that she was so upset by the loss of her first child that when she raised him, she put a cover over his crib, and to make sure no dust would ever get into it. So it's like being in this really confined space. And in her life, I saw I saw hope, which is what I wanted. So I saw the Dust Bowl story as a parable. And here you see part one, optimism, hope, new life, starting fresh. And then you see the tragedy. She loses her child. She has the land takes away her place. And then you see part three, which is the resilience herself. How can someone live through all that? So that's why I loved her. The character you may have been thinking of was a named Jeannie, and she was the daughter of a Broadway dancer whose mother was sent to the Great Plains for the air, and she ended up getting dust pneumonia. So she left New York City. She was a smoker. The air was terrible, and the doctor said, "You better go somewhere it's fresh." And actually, I didn't know this about Colorado Springs. They called them lungers. A lot of people came from dirty London for the air, just to breathe clean mountain air. And so they would come, the trains would drop them off here, and they came from industrial soiled London and industrial soiled Philadelphia and New York. But the story you're looking for is Jeannie told me her story. She was the very first person I interviewed for the Dust Bowl. She had a little oxygen cylinder, and she said, "Pull up a chair." And I asked her, "Does anyone know what happened here during the 1930s?" And she said, "No, just pull up a chair." And she told me these just beautiful stories that made me weep. And so I incorporated her, and she leads the book. So I start with her. And after the book came out, she called me up, and she was just giddy with excitement. And she said, "These little kids are showing up on my doorstep, and they want to do their school project on me." And she said, "The Rotary Club, which never looked twice at me, has invited me to be their speaker." And she stopped telling her story, which is what I worry about on World War II vets right now, that they are all slipping away. And I say to people, if you have a World War II vet in your family, gosh, get that family story and take it down. So she said, she was almost, she just was so giddy. And she said, "Tim, you made me like a rock star in this town." And she died about 2 months later. But she died having told her story. There's an immortality in that. And that's what I think we historians do. I called this book The Immortal Irishman because his words led to free blacks in this country through the Civil War. His words led to free Australians. They eventually got rid of the penal colony. When he was there, he wrote incendiary tracts. His words eventually led to a free Ireland. The 1916 Easter Rising, they used his words. So as historians, I think we like to think that words themselves are immortal. And I think that's what I had with her.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we could stay for another 5 hours and still be having a very good time. This is Tim's third visit for the Center of the American West. If he's going to say it, he has to say it now. If he goes ahead and says, if I say, "Is this your last visit?" and he says yes, then I will go off the stage and weep in the hallway. Okay. Is this your last visit, Tim?
She always has this great way of putting you on, putting a hook in you. Well, if you leave, as long as you're here, I'll come back.
Now,
and you do have tenure, so
I do have tenure.
You could die in this case,
and they won't notice. They won't notice as long as I have tenure.
They'll say she's still working on that book.
Yes, I am. I work on that interior book. So, okay. So now, please stay. Everyone, stay where you are, except for the members of the Center of the American West Board and spouses of those folks, faculty affiliates and spouses of faculty affiliates, and students, certificate students, or students who have been taking our courses. You folks, you're going to have a little trouble getting around, I suppose, but you and staff and of the Center of the American West, you will all come stand on the stage. And you will stand behind Tim and me, and I will read the certificate language. This is our custom. And then in the mail, this will come. Allison will make it beautiful. So that is our custom. So we have now a pilgrimage, migration, and certainly Mel, everybody lead the...
So this is sort of like the scarecrow getting the brain in the Wizard of Oz, isn't it?
No, you and your popular culture references. No.
Sorry.
So here.
The powers of
And there's board members and emeritus board members. There.
Impressive ritual.
It's a good ritual.
Yeah.
And here is that.
Thank you.
Which we won't read that.
And where do you want?
You stand with me here. The pictures always look really good. Yeah. Okay, please, everybody else, please stay with us for this ritual. It's brief and it is the culmination of the evening. Okay, are we all... Boy, you guys look photogenic. Man. Whew. So, whatever you need to do to squish in a little bit more here. Okay. Ready?
I am.
Ready. Ready? Ready. Stop talking. Okay. Here. The reading of the citation for the 2016 Wallace Stegner Award recipient, Timothy Egan. That would be you. Yeah. That's Liz. That's okay. You have placed on permanent record an extraordinary set of portraits of Western people who have encountered opportunity and loss, promise and disappointment, exhilaration and anguish, and still stayed on the trail with resilience and spirit. Your perfectly matched gifts, selecting individuals you know will be worthy of our attention and capturing the intensity, meaning, energy, and wonder of their lives, serve as a reliable yawn curtailment device, redeeming those benighted souls who go through life declaring, "I never cared much for history." Pretty darn quotable yourself, you have also served as collector, curator, and connoisseur of extraordinary quotations from people who have departed from life but left essential words in their wake. Even though financier J.P. Morgan, if restored to our company, would have deeply enjoyed expressing his contempt for your political convictions, one sentence you quoted from him, quote, "I like a man who attempts the impossible," could serve as a celebration of your own achievements in moving with grace from past to present and back again. Urging us to dream other dreams and better, Wallace Stegner hoped that Westerners would take part in a serious and searching conversation about our past, present, and future. You have orchestrated your career as a writer to give substance to Mr. Stegner's dream. As long as this region is your habitat, the charismatic megafauna known as the Western public intellectual will be spared an appearance on the endangered species list.